understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination. Though you may find from time to time complication. Bite your lip and take the trip. Though there may be wet road ahead and you cannot slip, just move on up for peace you'll find.
Wonderful. Sorry for the hard stop, everyone. Just as you may have been getting into the groove, but welcome. We'll go ahead and put the message down so you can see us, and we'll get started. Great. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to CREATE Center's community conversation on the meanings and approaches to community-based research. My name is Dr. Camille Wilson. I am a professor of education and a University Diversity and Social Transformation professor here at the University of Michigan. I am also the founding director of the CREATE Center. So I know we have some community members and scholars outside of Ann Arbor joining us today, and it is a pleasure to have you all here with us at the University of Michigan in this virtual space. We also have alumni joining us. So to you all, welcome back and go blue. So a little bit about CREATE. CREATE stands for Community-Based Research on Equity, Activism, and Transformative Education. The center is involved in a variety of research initiatives that we have started ourselves. Yet a key part of the center's mission is to unite university researchers and community advocates and activists all around the country and sometimes abroad to conduct and leverage research in ways that advance equitable and anti-racist education. Supporting inclusive, community-based, and community-engaged research is one example of our commitment to that goal. So today we are bringing together three phenomenal researchers at very different stages in their career and academic paths to offer insights about conducting community-based research. Our hope is that the discussion will offer intergenerational perspectives and lots of diverse perspectives about ways that we can do this really important work that will benefit and inspire students, faculty, and community members. So exciting for us today also at the center. It's our 3rd anniversary. So this is a fabulous way for us to celebrate. So I will introduce our guest and our moderator. I also want to remind you that you have the option to use closed captioning if that would help you better follow today's conversation. So first joining us is Dr. Tyron Douglas. Dr. Douglas is the inaugural Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Justice at the University of California, Berkeley, particularly in Cal Athletics. He has served as a tenured Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at the University of Missouri before joining Cal. He's the author or editor of 5 books and over 40 journal articles or book chapters. And Dr. Ty has consulted or been featured on Fox News, Sports Illustrated, the NCAA, the NFL, the NAACP, the National Basketball Players Association, and numerous universities, community, and civic organizations throughout North America, Europe, the Caribbean, and Africa. He's a former middle and high school English teacher, and Dr. Ty has been the recipient of many awards, including recognitions for his book, Border Crossing Brothers, Black Males Navigating Race, Place, and Complex Space. Additionally, we have Gabrielle Bernal joining us. Gabby, as she welcomes to be called, is a former special education teacher and current doctoral student in educational studies here at the University of Michigan, Marcel Family School of Education. She is in her 2nd year of learning Natural, and is a foreign language and area studies fellow. Gabby's research focuses on uplifting youth-centered social action by students and teachers using photo voice methodology. This approach involves a group working towards a common goal using photos, narratives, group conversations, and exhibition. Her interdisciplinary research is rooted in culturally sustaining mathematics education, informal and informal spaces, centering Indigenous and Latinx communities, schools, and homes within the US and in Mexico. Our third guest today is Gabrielle Kubi. Gabrielle Kubi is a doctoral candidate also in our school's combined program in education and psychology. She graduated from Cornell University with a BS in human development with minors in education and inequality studies. She holds an MS in psychology. During Gabrielle's undergraduate years, she participated in the program for research on youth development and engagement, a community engaged translational program partnered with New York State and a 4-H program to better cultivate positive youth development. Gabrielle Kubi is interested in the development of intersectional awareness among Black girls and women. She also considers how educational spaces can be reimagined to support Black people's social, political, and identity development, particularly through university school partnerships. Gabrielle is also the newest member of the Create Center's advisory board, so we are very excited about that. And last but definitely not least, our moderator for today is Mara Johnson. Mara is a doctoral student in educational foundations and policy, also here at the University of Michigan. And she is the Create Center's research assistant and programming coordinator. Mara had a key role in helping to plan and conceptualize today's event. So first, I want to thank Mara for that. Additionally, she is a former high school English teacher, and her own research interests relate to Black queer girls agency, community, and placemaking in school context. So as you're hearing, we just have a wonderful, wonderful group today. And thank you so much for moderating in advance, Mara. I will pass it to you to add any further comments and to launch our conversation.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I want to first begin with just a note for folks who are just joining us. If you would like to turn on closed captioning, it is available for you. In addition, the Q&A will be open, so you can drop questions there as we're talking today. And finally, just want to give a thank you to our Create Center staff, Sara Batul and Dr. Tanya Neff Chang, who also were so helpful in realizing today, helping with tech, helping with encouragement. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Thank you, Gabrielle Bernal and Gabrielle Kubi, for being here today and talking with us. So I want to go ahead and jump in so we have as much time to chat and connect as possible. And really the first thing I want to ask is just about your origin stories. So I want to invite you to each briefly share your origin story in about 2 minutes. Can you tell us about who you are, what brought you to your research, and how these inform the ways you think about community, power, and relationship building in your work? And so, Dr. Douglas, we're going to throw it over to you first.
First of all, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's great to be in the space. The one thing that my bio did not mention, and should in this context in particular, is that Dr. Camille Wilson was my advisor, and I'm honored to be able to just say I'm a part of the line of the Camille Wilson Brilliance, School of Brilliance. She's an amazing scholar and leader. I know those of you on this call can attest. So thank you again, Dr. Wilson, for your mentorship and friendship. Super excited to be here. And when I saw the question about my origin story and how it connects to my research, and in 2 minutes, I'll do my best. I think about my beginnings. I am the son of amazing parents. My dad is on the line as well. Grateful that he's in the space. And my mom, contextually, was a 19-year-old college freshman when she got pregnant with me. And she shared the story that, she actually felt me move for the very first time, where, pregnancies, can come to an end. I just want to be very thoughtful in just how I frame that, because I'm respectful of different stories that people have had. But when you talk about my origin story, I can't go anywhere else but that she felt me move there and felt that there was life that she felt was, central to her future and her journey. And so I always think about that beginning for me. And when people talk about activism and movement, for me, it began in the womb. And I just want to again just acknowledge the diversity of journeys and the power and importance of choice. When you talk about power, Dr. Mara, my mom's power to choose how she wanted to engage that season of her life. And I respect those who have chosen differently, but for her, that was the beginning of our relationship. And let me just connect the dots to the end of the conversation before I go any further. I just got off a flight yesterday, and I was sitting with that same mother who's no longer a 19-year-old college freshman. She's now working on her doctorate at the University of Missouri, where I was once a professor. And I was sitting with her, working on her dissertation, right? Supporting her in her journey, if you will, still challenging her to move. And you talk about activism, right? So I just want to make sure we can connect the dots between power, community, and I talk about identity, being a border crossing brother, of challenging systems and structures. Because the reality is that she considered, she went to that location in part because of systems and structures. She was raised in a church context that was somewhat oppressive. She went back home pregnant with me and was disfellowshipped from her church, right? And yet that church also was a part of the community that helped to nurture me. So I navigate those tensions very thoughtfully, because I believe that many of the spaces that are created to nurture us are also spaces that have been oppressive and have challenged us in our identities. And so for me, that's how it connects to my research. My dissertation focused on 3 particular, what I call community-based pedagogical spaces. I looked at barbershops, I looked at faith-based spaces, I looked at neighborhoods, and I looked at athletics, all right? And so I'm happy to share a bit more as we go forward. I want to be sensitive to time, but I hope that at least those bookend experiences of how I began, where I am now, working in sport, former middle and high school English teacher, but also a person that knows the power of beginnings and the spaces that we are in and the power of timely movement. And that's how I engage my research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas. I love that idea of just the movement started in the womb, which probably needs to be on a t-shirt somewhere. But Gabby, who one of you like to jump in?
Sure, I can go ahead and jump in. Thank you all so much for organizing this space. It's great to be in community with you all. And I think for me, like a big piece of this has been like my journey started as a sister, a little sister, and then moving into the classroom space, not ever thinking that I was going to be a teacher, but somehow becoming a teacher, right? Being a substitute teacher, then becoming a classroom teacher, specifically a special education high school mathematics teacher, and always feeling like pretty confident enough with the content knowledge, but then being asked to support teachers and help them with their process and being like, wait, like, I don't know how to do this. So needing to really think about how I was navigating, and community has always been so important to me and my family, and thinking about how there's just like so much power that's held in schools, but really if we think about education, right, like families have just even more power. And so thinking about like how can I really think about how we're thinking about these narratives of education and schooling, and how can we pull in parents and families and young people and community members to share what they have to say about schooling and education, and really being so prideful in the young people that are in the community, besides the like narrative that's often used around youth with special education needs, whether they have disabilities or have been have a strong disabled identity. And so thinking about all of those different complexities has really been a big part of that. And so go ahead and pass it over to Gabby.
It is afternoon time. So good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Thanks everybody for being here. And thanks to my homie Mara and everybody else at Create for putting this on. So I guess a little bit about myself. I'm a second generation Ghanaian immigrant. I come from a working class family. And I think that I have always had a curiosity about like why things are the way that they are. So I like also had too much time on the computer when I was younger. So I like Googled like what are jobs that you do and you want to find out why things are the way that they are. So I've always been a very procedural person, even as baby. So I was like, oh, it seems like psychology is the study of, you know, how the mind works and like, you know, how people fit into their families, how they relate to others. So I was like, I'm going to take AP Psych. I'm going to major in some kind of psychology. I found out about human development because I'm also very invested in using my skills to uplift the communities that I'm part of. So doing psychology with a little bit more of an applied and sociological focus. And I've always been trying to kind of figure out how to fit all the pieces of my stuff together. So in undergrad, we didn't have a full school of education. So I was learning about the field of education through history, like humanities classes, Africana studies, policy classes, and things like that, and melding that with my psychological knowledge. And I finished undergrad in 2020. So I always kind of like make it clear for people like my first year of undergrad in November is when Trump got elected. And then at the end of undergrad, my senior year got interrupted by COVID and like the racial reckoning and things like that, right? So I was engaged in some campus activism. And in thinking about my time in that space, I thought about not only how there was certain labor or flack or like extra work expected of me, not just by virtue of my being Black, but by my being a Black woman specifically. And in spending more time in community with other like Black girlhood scholars like Mara, Mimi, Monet, Anna, our other friends and things like that. I was like, oh, dang, I don't just have to study Black kids generally, but there's this really specific intersectional experience that I want to hold myself and my scholarship accountable to. So I came into graduate school studying like socio-political development and critical consciousness and things like that. So in transitioning my work to be more about Black girls and realizing the ways in which like Black women, especially in education, like hold themselves accountable to their students families, their own families, community activism and community uplift and things like that. I've been curious about what it means to like attribute that involvement to your gendered racial identity, and the different kind of forms that are specific to Black girls and women that involvement can look like. So that's what brought me to the work. That's who I am. And I kind of use my research as a way to build relationships with people and to engage in like fugitive practices. So how can I use my position, like affiliated with the university, to pour back resources that we have here into like actual communities and kind of push back against that power dynamic of hoarding all of this goodness like in an ivory tower and keeping that away from people who deserve and could be impacted the most by these resources. So that's how I'd answer this question.
Thank you all for sharing just some of who you are, which is important for us to remember as well, that we are whole individuals who are a part of the work that we're doing. And so I appreciate you all sharing. And in some continuation, you are all talking about your origin stories, but there are a lot of students who are trying to figure out where to start, where their origin story starts. And so they aspire to do community-based research, but sometimes feel unsure where to begin. And so this question is, what advice do you have for beginning community-based research? And what kinds of resources, relationships, and opportunities have you leveraged, both in and outside the university, to help realize that work? And Gabby Bernal, if you will, love to start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Mara. I love this question for so many reasons. And I think a big part of that is because like there is such an interest in like, how do you get started in this work and like what happens? And there's so many different possibilities and so many ways that this work can take shape. I'm thinking about what Gabby just shared and how like there's such a strong community of women of color scholars in the School of Education at Michigan that have connected and created a level of community. There's faculty members that have like encouraged us, like, oh, that is a beautiful question. Like, keep asking that question. Even when people tell you to stop asking it, like, keep at it. And so just thinking about, like, what is it that you're curious about? What is it that's important to you? And that can be more than enough to really get started in this work. For me, it was really people and place are so important, and that driving force of knowing that I need to belong and be part of a community in order to really understand what is it that is going on within that community, and through that community and relationships, there's like this level of like networking that happens really informally, like, oh, do you know so and so, like, you should connect with them, let me connect you. Or do you know my godmother, like, you should have brunch with her, like, let's have brunch and she can connect you with like this arts community space, right? And so just knowing that there's like a level of trust that's being built really informally, but then it turns into a formal channel of communication, and there's a way that things are uplifted. For me, a lot of it has been like working with families, like talking to grandmas and grandpas and uncles and parents and nieces and nephews, right? Like just across generations. And then so that's kind of been like just the way I kind of navigate the world, that's kind of unfolded. And kind of in the more formal setting at the university, like taking many courses through the Race and Social Justice Institute, and connecting with one of the many course instructors, and you know, just knowing that like that initial like 4-week class turned into like a multi-year relationship that like we continue to text, and that's been true with community partners, whether it's families that I've worked with that like invited me to birthday parties and we're like, oh, well, you have to come, like, you know, like we want you there, or we're having this celebration in the community, like please come through. Like we realize that like maybe culturally this isn't part of like your culture, but we would love to share that with you. And so just knowing that there's so many different ways that people and organizations and future possibilities really unfold with those personal connections.
I'll go after you, Dr. Gabby K. I'll go after you. You got it.
Okay. So I really liked Gabby's point about, I think, the importance of relationships in this work, because like whether we're talking about community-based or community engaged work, like it starts with the community, right? So if you're not truly embedded in the spaces where you're wanting to do this work, then it's just going to fall flat, because that's the most important part, is the community aspect, and then the research comes after that. So I think kind of along those lines, what I'm thinking about is like, you have to be ready to show up to do whatever needs to be done. So necessarily you might have your own agenda or your own ideas of what might be helpful in this space, but if that doesn't align with the community members' like knowledge, which is more valid, if not just equal to yours, then you got to do what they need you to do to demonstrate like that commitment and that interest in building that relationship. And even when you get into this space and you're meeting whatever the present need is or figuring out how to do that, I try to be mindful to think about how I can bring in other resources, or how I can, you know, create opportunities to collaborate like across, you know, not just, you know, this is the given team, these are the only people we're relying on. So if there's, you know, people are talking about, I like do work with a high school. So if girls are curious about how to do their hair and I'm at the salon and somebody mentions that they're looking for a space to put on classes to teach about like braiding and like natural hair maintenance, then I'm going to make a connection to the assistant principal and the person who runs that salon. And similarly, like when you have friends or, you know, peer colleagues who are interested in doing this work, thinking about like what are opportunities to loop you in to utilize your research and your interest, so that like I'm not the only one who's kind of like being fed in this space, but I'm figuring out ways to feed my friends as well. And I would say lastly, like there are ways to build these skills, even if you don't have a partnership. So just thinking about like, you know, kind of like Gabby was saying, what are campus spaces, part-time jobs, clubs, organizations, courses that I can take to build maybe some of these data and evaluation skills, or even just like looking back at your own class projects or writing, like, how would I write this if I were wanting to translate this for another audience? How would I write this if I wanted to share my findings with school administrators? How would I write this if I wanted to share my findings with my family? And kind of building that literacy on your own time until, you know, the moment strikes that you're in partnership with an organization or community. So those are the things that came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's good. I love what my colleagues have shared. I'll just add briefly, when I talk about being a border crossing brother, I want to make sure I give you a framework that comes out of my work. I talk about not just doing research, but doing what I describe as me-search, right? So if you imagine like 3 concentric circles, right? I think it's vital that we do me-search, which is why I think the origin story question was a great place to begin. But not just, you know, research is important, me-search is important, but I think we also have to pan out and not just consider the story of me or my story, but what's the story of we, right? So Dr. Gabby K, when you talked about, you know, your family being from Ghana, I immediately thought of my youngest son, whose name is Essien, right? And that's a Ghanaian name, right? So there's a we there, right? And when you do all 3, when you do me search, when you do research, and when you do research, that's where the sweet spot happens that I describe in the middle of free search, right? I think there's something really powerful as young scholars who want to call to know that your story matters, that the story of your community matters, that the research is basically what people think they know about us also is important, but you got to get that sweet spot of all 3, which is where liberation, I believe, happens, because you have a sense of self, you have a sense of your community, and you have a sense of what people think they know about us, right? And sometimes people think they know more about us than we know about ourselves. And so I want to make sure that you know that there is a framework that you could perhaps use or at least think about for your work in that regard. Number 2, I think it's important that you know that you're already full. I need you to get that. All right, let me say it in this way. So I was a tenured professor at the University of Missouri, there for 10 years. And when this opportunity came at Cal, you know, there were people who said, listen, well, you know, you will hear this narrative, wait till you become an associate professor and get tenure and then ... right? And so I got, you know, tenure as associate professor. And then people would say, well, wait till you become full. And like everything that was happening in the world in 2020. And at some point, I just felt in my spirit, I'm like, I'm already full. I'm full of gifts. I'm full of talents. I'm full of ideas. I've got stuff that my community needs now. I can't wait for you to tell me I'm full in your higher ed context to go and do what I was called to do. So I want to make sure that those of you in this call, you walk into these spaces like, I'm already full. I might even have my PhD yet. With humility, that there are things to learn, but I think there's something powerful about knowing that our stories matter and that the academy may not always fully understand or even have the language to describe what you already know. Also, it's important to stay connected and embedded in the community. When I was at the University of Missouri, I spent just as much time at Douglas Park, which is a local basketball court. You know, we planted a church. Like I was in the community, and it helped to sustain me. And I think it's vital because some of the most brilliant scholars may never have a traditional PhD. And my work looks at scholars like, you know, barbers and mechanics, and I mean, just people who have never been affirmed, carpenters, never been affirmed by traditional schools, but have the juice, right? And ideas and things that we need. So I think it's important that we stay connected to the spaces that produce this and to respect the brilliance in them, because again, the academy is not going to allow you to, stay with me, create all that you're supposed to create, right? So you have to do that, staying grounded in who you are, where you're from, your community that produced you, the research that already exists, but being free to be able to create new ideas, new frameworks, and new ways of thinking, epistemological ideas to be able to consider the ways of knowing so that you can help others to be known.
Thank you all so much for that. And I mean, that's affirmation I need to hear as a student who's still on the journey. And I'm just appreciative and thinking about the ways of just showing the importance of showing up and doing it and taking the leap of knowing these connections will come. You know, Gabby Bernal, you were talking about you meet someone and they connect you to another person, and they say, show up to this party. Or Gabby Kubi, you're talking about, if you hear someone say, hey, I'm interested in this, that's a chance for you to be a connector as well. And I think sometimes we're looking for who's going to connect us to something rather than how we can be connectors, and thereby that also opens us up to other relationships. So I appreciate so many things you all shared. I think some of this was coming up already, but want to talk a little bit about mentorship for students. And sometimes there's a struggle for students to find mentorship, or we're nervous about how to connect with potential mentors. And so I want to ask, where have you found mentorship throughout your research journey? And how do you cultivate those relationships as a student? And so Gabby Kubi, if we could start with you, and Gabby Bernal, your perspective as students, and Dr. Douglas, maybe thinking from a faculty perspective.
I think this is a really good question. And I think that even, I wouldn't say more so, but maybe like in the same way that the general advice that you're given when you're navigating graduate school, or even just life in general, is like different people are going to have different, juice like for your different needs. So I think that there are people like both within and outside of the academy, and people at this institution and at other institutions who I've identified as those sorts of mentors. So I think it's good to think about like what the various different needs that you or your community have, and who are maybe faculty members or people in some other space that's more advanced than like whatever your career station is, like how can they feed into those things? So who can I go to when I want to, workshop how to like navigate a certain conversation with my partners? Who can I go to for feedback on writing up the work that I've been doing? Who can I go to for a letter of recommendation if I need to get funding for this thing? Also, like, who can I go to when people like have me messed up? Because I think a lot of the time, especially in doing this work, because it's so deeply relational and personal, some things you may take personally that actually don't really have to do with you, but some things is like, dang, that like really hurt my feelings. So who are you going to talk to, like when your feelings are hurt and things like that. So I think recognizing that people have different capacities for your varying needs and figuring out who fits into what slots is important. And in terms of cultivating those relationships, I think it's a similar kind of follows the theme of what we've been articulating, not like letting go of certain relationships. Like I still catch up every now and again with one of the program directors for the research training program I was in undergrad. And that I think I met her like 6 or 7 years ago. And I think a particularly weird thing that happens in the academy by virtue, I feel like, of whiteness and individualism and capitalism is like, you can't keep up with everybody. I don't agree with that. So I think also, like Dr. Ty was saying, people are always going to tell you to wait, hold off on things, that a certain way of being or navigating the space isn't what's going to bring you success or fulfillment, but nobody knows you better than yourself and the people who helped you become who you are. So staying connected with people, even just personally, keeping people updated on what you're doing, and then continuing to think of opportunities to feed or to exchange or even kind of like barter your literacies and theirs, I think can be a good way to cultivate relationships in this work, especially when you're looking for mentors.
Oof, yes, to all of that. Oh, sorry, Mara. There, I think for me as well, like very similarly to Gabby, like thinking about like those near peer mentors have been foundational and grounding. Shout out to the cohort on the line. Just knowing that like if ever there's like a question, I'm just like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now, like sending a quick text, or knowing that there's other people that are doing this work and have amazing skills, and knowing that that's a form of mentorship that's come along my way. But along with the mentorship, oftentimes comes like a level of friendship and care and love, and a level of like holding of what's needed. And sometimes it's not necessarily what I want, but it's usually what I need. And And so knowing that it might be like a quick text or a quick message on WhatsApp, or knowing that there's someone that I like really admire and want to reach out to, and like sending a very thoughtful message to them and just being like, thank you, I see you, and like if time offers, like I would love to connect with you. And you know, sometimes that might feel like a really daunting task, but then also knowing that like Gabby was saying, if you haven't talked to someone in a couple years, like there's no shame in reaching out and being like, oh, like, you know, I've thought about you, I care about you, like I would love to connect and catch up. And just knowing that those moments oftentimes are what like construct this like mentorship, but like also this really deep, caring friendship, and knowing that there's so much to go on, and really thinking about like, for me, a big piece is like storytelling and sharing of stories, and knowing that there's just a connection that can happen and often does happen. And for me, like listening to stories about what people are doing or what they're up to, what they've done, their journeys, and taking that with me as a way of like being sustained, and knowing that that's lifting me up, like from this talk, knowing that like, you know, I am full, like, yes, I think that's just such a beautiful piece of mentorship that I'm going to be taking with me in this space, and hopefully, as Gabby mentioned earlier as well, like being a way to like connect people more fully in that work. So thank you, Dr. Douglas, for that.
No, I appreciate you, Dr. Gabby B. Thank you. I want to just circle back to a statement from Dr. Gabby K. And you said, you talked about trying to fit all the pieces of my stuff together. I thought that was a really powerful line. I think when I think about mentorship, you know, I think there really isn't another you, right? Or for all who are watching. And so, you know, what I realize is, you know, I believe there are pieces of different people that I've learned from, or that's impacted who I am as a scholar. And I think about it through a former, you know, doc student lens and as a faculty member. For example, I remember even why I chose to go to the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, right? And I had an offer from UNC Chapel Hill, but I saw a picture of the amazing Camille Wilson and CP Goss, and they were talking about critical spirituality and community-based this, and I'm like, that exists, right? And so for me, it was about also working with and being proximate to people, right? So I want to encourage us to be proximate. Proximity matters, and getting with and being proximate to people, again, who are outside of the academy, outside of the schoolhouse. So one of my most significant mentors is my barber. Dr. Wilson will know this. I mean, he came to my PhD graduation, and I've learned about how to be a researcher and how to engage community from him. And you know, he wasn't someone that should, you know, transition through the traditional school system. You'll love this, Dr. Morrow, former middle and high school English teacher like you. And he was someone who, I would say like this, like literacy wasn't a strength for him, but he taught literacy every single day by buying the newspaper at the barbershop and facilitating conversations. So I learned, again, from coaches. I learned even now from folks like, you know, the coach of Liverpool. I've never met him, but I've seen how he's, you know, connected generations of players. And so when I think about in the academy, I mean, there are scholars that have impacted me as a faculty member, even now as an administrator. You know, I'm constantly learning from different people, but always doing it with the reality, or with the belief that no one person has all that I need. And I think it's, again, important that, to your point, you use the word bartering or reciprocity, right? That we're not just trying to take, that we're not just reaching out when we need something, but actually really concerned and caring about the whole development of individuals who may even be mentors. So I think people can feel that. And so, again, I'll just give a shout out to a couple of names that came to my mind for me in my journey. I think about Michael Dentley, who I realized, like, you could have a pastoral, you know, background and be in the academy, and people like Tyrone Howard, who's now ARA president. Like, to see, for me, another tall Daskian brother, like when I was starting out, I was like, man, this, like, and he was writing about Black masculinity, like so even just like representation of seeing people who even look like you, or from different places geographically like you, all those different touch points matter as relates to your sense of belonging in the academy. And then also knowing that, again, the academy is not the only space where you're going to engage or garner mentorship. some of my most significant mentors have been people outside the schoolhouse, speakers and others who are doing the work in very diverse ways.
Thank you all again. More beautiful reflections. And I think the takeaway for me is mentorship is everywhere, and in so many forms. And we can look to our friends. We can look to the person who's cutting our hair. We can look to young people as our mentors as well. And certainly, they teach us they teach us a lot, and they're honest. And there's something to be said for that. And just want to lift up again. This is going to be the last question I pose before we turn to the Q&A. So I want to invite people to drop questions or even just thoughts in the Q&A, and I'll work to lift those up after. But to sort of ground into maybe a specific example or context from your work, just thinking about community-based or a community-based or community-engaged study that you've worked on, and what is a lasting insight that you've taken away from that research, and maybe something that you would want to share with folks today that they can take away. And whoever would like to begin, I want to just open it up here.
I can go. So I think that even when I started undergrad, I was like, I don't even know what research is. I didn't know I went to a research institution. I was like, I'm not trying to do any kind of school after this. I want a job and money. And I have a job. I necessarily don't have the money. And I've been in school for a very long time. My mom always jokes that like, I did preschool once at church and then once again, because she didn't want me to be younger than everybody else. So I've been in school a year longer than everyone else who came straight through from undergrad. So I'm tired. But I think that I really like research because it allows you to actually touch into all the different, traditional school disciplines. So we're writing, there may be some kind of math involved, even if it's just, budgeting stuff. You need to know like the socio-historical context of the community with which you're working. And in doing this as research, like there's a science to this process. So I think research in and of itself allows me to tap into a lot of different ways of knowing or engaging deeply with knowledge. But this community-based work, I think, allows me to utilize like the professional or academic skills I have to build relationships. And so there's the programming piece, there's the partnership piece, but even these skills, like my partner is on the call today, I can use my grant writing skills to help him and his friends apply for artist grants and things like that. So I'm very thankful to do a kind of work that allows me to relate more deeply to people and to feed people. And I think that's the best part of the community-based work is it's variable, you need to be responsive, and it can allow you to connect really deeply to people and really see the impact of your work and to even feel it personally and in an embodied way too. So that's what I would say.
I'm happy to go next. I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I think it's been great. I just want to give you a framework, extension of my framework that may help you to connect some dots as well. So I told you about me search, research creates what I call free search. For me, when you do free search and you add it to leadership, I call that freedomship, right? So everything that I do is still grounded in that same framework. When I talk about working with teachers, Dr. Mar, free search plus teach, I like to say that we want to freach, right? And so again, I connected I raised this because I want you to think about what do you mean, everyone, by community-based research? Who is community? Who is your community? How do you consider, how do you define community? I think that's vital because for me, community is broadly defined. And so a project that I'm super excited about now is really my work that's embedded in athletics. I've seen some things, and when I say seen something, just being here at what and Dr. Wilson will challenge this as a UCLA grad, but they describe themselves here as the #1 public university And there's a debate there, Dr. Wilson. I'll leave that alone. But the reality is, there's an interesting tension, even as far as our identity, right? Where people say they go to Berkeley, right? The academic sort of identity, if you will, of the institution, and then the Cal piece is sort of connected to student athletes or the athletic space. And so there's this bifurcation again of trying to almost separate these worlds. Then again, as a scholar who's always thinking about the intersections and a border crosser, right? And the belief in the brilliance of those who haven't always been traditionally affirmed by systems and structures, I feel really excited about this work of advocating for athletes as scholars, and the power of their influence on community. I'll be specific. You got folks on this call who work in the School of Education. The reality is that, our journal articles, we talk about impact factor and all that, but Steph Curry's got more juice than us as relates to the kids that are in our classrooms. And so I think we have to humble ourselves and think about how do we ensure that our athletes know that they are educators, but also what can we learn from the pedagogical spaces. And when you go to a basketball game, the next time you go to the big house, come on, Michigan, right? And that's a classroom, that's a worship experience, 100 grand, 100,000 people cheering, right? But these are spaces that we have never really fully considered as not just community-based spaces for education, but spaces of pedagogy and spaces where maybe teachers or people who could be teachers could be invited into the known profession of education, whether it be formally or informally. So I want us to, again, think about whose community, who is community, and whose community matters to us, to our structures, and then making sure that we can advocate and affirm and challenge institutions to invite and include those, frankly, who have kept us balanced when we've gone through traditional schools, particularly for us as Black and brown folks, schools that never thought that we were smart, never thought that they were not creative for us. And so it really was the barbershop and the neighborhood and the church space and these other spaces that kept us grounded, right? And so don't forget that when we get into these spaces and we start writing our journal articles, the journal articles are okay, but the people aren't necessarily reading them. So for me, it's videos, it's documentaries, it's being in the community spaces with the people, it's inviting them into our space, but going to them and ensuring that that we can cross-pollinate and maximize the impact, brilliance, beauty of what I define as community, while also being respectful to the structures they have access to, like higher ed.
I'm really thinking about like all of these different aspects, and I feel like they resonate so deeply with me right now. And just a couple of weeks, I'll be heading back to Puebla, Mexico, to go connect with the community that I did some work with in person, virtually over a couple months, and now it's like 2 years later, and so just like knowing that like the celebrations that we've like had over technology, we'll be able to like engage with that in person, and knowing that I've learned so much from the young people, and they've encouraged me to learn even more, and just knowing that like there's so much in the gift of language, and their encouragement to like improve my Spanish and continue to work at it, but then also to take on and learn Nahuatl, and like be like, okay, like I need to do the work. Like it shouldn't be the work of the community to teach me everything. I need to take some ownership in that. And it's been just like such a beautiful experience to know that there are so many opportunities for learning together as a community, learning with youth, learning from youth, and then knowing that like we're like being real humble and being like, okay, we had this plan, we thought we were going to do this thing, we did that thing and it fell flat, so like we're going to do this other thing and pull on these strings and listen to like what feels right. And so it's been just such an amazing experience to know that there's so many different ways that not only do we influence, but we get influenced by the community, and this community engaged work. I think a big piece of that is like making sure that like accessibility is a big piece of that. Like if we're setting out to do this, like who gets invited into the space and why, and making sure that it's really meaningful to the everyday aspect. And I know that that both Gabby and Dr. Douglas have like brought this up. And so I think for me, like the next piece is really just thinking about like, what can I do to like help support community engaged work, and then also be like really intentional with the work that I'm taking in. So thank you so much for these beautiful questions, Laura.
Yeah, so we have a moment for Q&A, and there's a question that I want to put out from someone, Chaz Phillips, who's here. It says, hello, and thank you first for this wonderful discussion. My interests are primarily in training pre-service mathematics teachers and identifying, valuing, and weaving the cultural and communal mathematical competencies of African-American students into their pedagogical decisions. And he asks, how can I learn to engage with the community so their interests and my research interests align in ways that enable us to move forward together in finding and creating solutions? So I'll leave it open to.
I think you said the person's name was Chaz, Dr. Chaz?
Yes.
I'll just, I mean, I was sort of alluded to it in my previous answer. I'll make it explicit. So I've sat in wide receiver rooms, preparation rooms with the teaching, working on the routes for these student athletes. And if you're in these spaces, like in sport, just in particular, I would say, and you're talking about math and connecting to young people, man, like sport and these athletes, they're mathematicians, they're physicists, right? Like, I mean, when you make a one-handed catch, it's what we've written about in theory in practice. And so I would suggest that, when we think about community more broadly, when we think about scholarship and what brilliance looks like more holistically, I think the solutions are already there. Like, most of those kids that you may be working with, you don't have to convince them about, the efficacy or the value of the athletes that they watch, right? But if we can connect the dots between things that they're already passionate about and things that they maybe even have to do, let's say math or schooling, right? I think that there's some intersections that they maybe have overlooked because, again, we sort of try to bifurcate academics, athletics, or academics, your musical gifting or your creativity, right? So, and that is a Eurocentric sort of ideology, whereas, the traditions that I've come from are far more intersectional, far more holistic as relates to, thinking about what brilliance looks like. But at times, I think we've acquiesced to systems and structures that have tried to suggest that our athleticism or your creativity or whatever other skills that you have to fit within a particular box. And I think that we open up the aperture a bit wider to be able to help students to connect to things that they already love and to see the engineering, the physics, the math that's embedded in it. I believe that will create new space for opportunity, relation building, and the identification of their gifts and their contributions that I think that they can make if they show those connections.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas. I'm going to throw it over to you, Camille. I do just want to lift up as well. Dr. Denise Jones is in the Q&A, just offering a moment of appreciation and affirmation for all the speakers. So grateful that we are holding space for these important conversations. So Camille, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all again for joining us. It's been short but very sweet with your insights, and I wanted to be mindful of our time and also touch on some things as well. So first, I love Dr. Douglas's comments towards the beginning about recognizing how we can be in spaces and particularly institutions that are nurturing and oppressive at once, right? And that's so relevant actually to the formation of CREATE. And, for me, I'm very conscious that I do my work, we do our work in an elite Research One university, an absolutely fantastic and outstanding university, one of the best in the world. And at the same time, one that is always in need of improvement. and one that has a problematic history of being extractive in communities, right? As do most universities, particularly research universities. So, so much of what's been shared here is, central to CREATE's mission and additionally inspiring. So thank you all so much. Also, Gabrielle Bernal, in speaking about the relationship formation, part of what Chaz asked about, you spoke to, folks are saying, please come through. And I think of that as what Gabrielle Kubi said, show up, right? Part of this work in forging connections is knowing that we have to come first with humility and first to serve, right? Before research, we're there to build in a relationship, and we have to be there to serve, right? And so my thought is, if you do not want to serve, if you do not want to use your research for the greater good, leave communities alone, right? Because I also, think that what everyone has shared speaks to not over romanticizing this work, right? This is hard work, and it takes time, and it takes mentorship and apprenticeship and learning, right? We can have the best of intentions and have this excitement, but if we just jump right into community with our ideas of what they need, or our creative ways of what we think we want to do, we will harm. And so thank you all for just your criticality and your reflection today. And I think embedded in that is just really important calls to action. Gabrielle Kubi also spoke to not hoarding resources again. Yes, as I spoke to with CREATE's mission is how do we leverage research sometimes? And with that comes leveraging the resources of the university, of the institutions, and helping push the universities where we're situated, those of us at U of M and elsewhere, to fulfill the express mission around equity and inclusion through our work with communities, not just in, right? So again, such great insight today. And of course, all of this goes back to the importance of reciprocity, which you all have spoken to as well. So I think this conversation just supports this idea that to be conducting and leveraging research with community from an institutional standpoint, our call is to be reparative, not extractive, and to be generous and inclusive and collaborative. And wonderful questions and responses about mentoring too. And we hope that this space, in our hour together, has also offered that joint mentoring, the peer mentoring, the mentoring out for folks who are with us virtually. And so we all appreciate everyone's time today. Folks are studying, grading, doing so many things in partnership. So this is an intense time, and we're grateful for the connections. So thank you all so much. And feel free to come off mic.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you for having us.
And thank you, Mara, as always.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here. In the audience, thank you, Dr. Douglas, Dr. Gabby Bernal, Dr. Gabby Kubi, Dr. Camille Wilson. We are naming and claiming it for some of us and owning it already. We are full. So if anyone will be here on the chat, if anyone has questions you didn't get to answer, at least Dr. Wilson and I will stay on until 1:15. So you are welcome to stay if you have questions, but if not, thank you all again for being here. And we look forward to learning together more.
Thank you so much. Appreciate this space and conversation, continuing to self-reflect.
It's a journey too. Self-reflection is a journey.
Absolutely. It's great. It's great. Dr. Morrow, it's great to be able to share space with you. Look forward to hearing more about your work as well. I know you facilitated the conversation, but look forward to learning more about your work. So thank you again and well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I think when we first had our meeting recently, it's like, oh, we'd only seen each other briefly through a screen at a meeting. And so it was nice to just have an opportunity to connect and get to know each other. So